One thing you should try to do if you are taking a video or a picture, try to timestamp it, the date, the time, when did this take place? Because sometimes if you just send a general picture and it has no timestamp or anything that shows when this took place, they will argue, oh, well, that could have been 2 years ago. That could have been 6 months ago. They're not sure when it takes place. So it does help us if you're trying to send us those type of pictures and videos to try to timestamp it too, so we can kind of lock down when did this actually take place.
Welcome back to Lemon Law Unpeeled, the Lemon Law podcast. I'm Emma.
And I'm Courtney.
And I'm Steven.
And today we're going to be talking about how best to document your lemon law claim should you find yourself in the situation where you're dealing with a lemon. First and foremost, obviously, our absolute evidence that we have for lemon law is our repair orders. Those you only have so much control of that can make it kind of tricky. Courtney, I'll let you talk about what are the important parts of a repair order, what should a consumer be looking for when they pick up their vehicle and are reading that repair order, which I guess would be tip number one, right? Read your repair order when you pick up the vehicle, because so many clients don't, and then it comes back to kind of bite them in the end. So I'll let you talk a little bit more about that and why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime you go to pick up your vehicle, you are going to be handed a repair invoice and asked to sign it. Super important that you read it, because if it does need to be amended in any way, it's a lot easier to get that done while you are still at the dealership before you have accepted your vehicle back. So the most important parts are going to be the RO, which stands for repair order open date, and the RO close date. And those are both going to be little boxes up at the top of the document. The open date is the date that you dropped the vehicle off, and the close date is the date that you're picking it up. And those are so important because they show how long your vehicle was out of service. And then as you read down in the body of the document, there are going to be your complaints. And it will usually say C/S, which stands for customer states. And then it will show your complaint or state your complaint. And then it will state whether the issue was verified or duplicated. Those are different words that they might use, and what repairs were done. So you want to make sure that everything that you complained about is there. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a client say, well, I complained about that issue, but I also complained about these 3 other issues, and they didn't write them down. If they didn't write them down, we can do very little to recover for them. So you want to make sure all of your complaints are there. If they verified or duplicated an issue, like if the technician told you that they felt the issue or saw the issue, you want to make sure that it says that the issue was verified, as well as any repairs that they made. And that's going to be our main proof moving forward of what your issue was and what they did to correct it, as well as how long your vehicle was at the dealership.
And another thing I would point out that Courtney's talking about, when you're given the description of your issue, make sure each time it's the same thing. For example, sometimes clients will say, well, there was a creaking in my axle, and the next time it might say squeaking. That may sound like such a minor difference, but making sure it says the same type of sound each time does have an impact on the case, and also on how the repair invoices reflect back.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Basically, they're going to use any amount of wiggle room that they can to try to make it seem like you have different complaints when they're reviewing the repair orders, if you're in court or something of the like, in order to show that they were different complaints and you have not had a repetitive concern. So, Stephen, you're absolutely right that you have to read that over and make sure that it's correct, because these dealerships do take creative liberties, right? They're going to write down whatever they think they heard, or they might do a truncated or a shortened version of what you reported. And in the end, that can really hurt you because they can try to divide those defects up to show different visits for different complaints. And kind of a note too, kind of off of what you said, Courtney, just to clarify. So the ready date is when the repairs were completed. So let's say that the dealership calls you on Friday and says, hey, your vehicle's ready. Right? But you're out of town. You won't be able to pick it up until Wednesday. The repair order that you pick up will show a ready date of Friday, because that's when the repairs were completed. The day that you actually pick it up, and those, 3 or 4 additional days that it sat at the dealership waiting for you to get back from your vacation or wherever you were, those don't actually count as days out of service. It's just days that they're there for repair. But it's still super, super important to make sure all of those days are correct, because that can be a huge part of your case. I have a case going right now where we're actually going to have to depose the service manager because the vehicle essentially has been out of service for over a year. But because of the different repairs that they've done on the vehicle, they've managed to chop up the repair orders to make it look like it was in and out within, 30 days each time, which isn't accurate. And our client didn't notice that until we got to this point where we're in litigation and we're looking at the case of what we can prove and what we can't. And so now we have to depose the service manager to get whatever information we can out of them to try to prove how long that it's been there. Stephen, I'll let you talk a little bit about these repair orders in terms of mileage in and mileage out too, because that can be a concern when we're going in court and they're trying to say, well, the problem happens 20 minutes after driving, right? If the dealership is telling you that they're taking extensive test drives and things like that, it can be smart to maybe know what your mileage was in and out as well, so that we can also show whether or not they're doing what they're supposed to.
Absolutely. So on the repair invoice, there's 2 boxes up there that will say the mileage in, that's when you dropped off the vehicle and what the mileage was, and the mileage out. That's the mileage that you had on your odometer when you get the vehicle back from your repair attempt. Sometimes the odometer will not change because they had the vehicle only on the lot and were just working on it without doing a test drive. However, if it's an issue where you have to drive the vehicle and it happens while you're driving, you need to try to see if they did actually drive it, because if the mileage didn't change at all from the time brought in and time you got it back, that shows that they didn't really even take an attempt to drive it around to see what the issue was that you reported. If it does reflect the mileage, though, take a note of how many miles they did drive. Did they only drive it for 3 miles? Did they drive it for 20 miles? There was one case I've had a while ago where they drove it over 200 miles when it was in their possession because they kept trying to figure it out. So these are things to keep note of how many miles did they really drive it if you are having issues while it's being driven.
Yeah, that's really important. I had a case like that too, a Mercedes-Benz case where we ended up in court where the first 2 or 3 visits, they said they couldn't duplicate the problem, but they had only driven the car like maybe a mile, or at least that's what the repair record showed. And then finally on the 3rd visit, they drove it closer to 20, 30 miles and they were able to duplicate the problem because Mercedes-Benz was trying to kind of wiggle out of liability by saying it all matters about repairs actually performed. So we were trying to use that to show, well, they didn't perform a thorough enough diagnostic to actually perform a repair, which was their responsibility. And it wasn't until they did more digging that they actually were able to find the problem. And speaking of finding a problem, Courtney, I'll let you talk about how important that verbiage is too on the repair order in terms of, cannot duplicate it or not, because that's what really makes a lemon law claim strong, right? You can get a million repair orders, but what's really important is whether they actually found a problem.
Yeah, that's so true. If you go back 12 times and they're never able to verify your problem, it's really not a very strong case. What we need to be able to show is that the problem was verified, it was duplicated, and repairs were attempted. So it's super important if they are verifying it. In other words, when you go to pick the vehicle up, if they say, oh, this is the tech who drove it, and he felt the issue or he saw the issue, you want to make sure that they're writing that down. It should say something to the effect of problem duplicated, problem verified. You want to make sure that it does not say CND, which stands for could not duplicate or could not verify. Because if they did in fact verify or duplicate it, you want that documented because that is extremely important to the case.
It really is. And another tricky part too that we have with these repair orders that I've run into a lot is codes, right? So, and I actually just had a conversation yesterday with an opposing counsel where our client had repeatedly complained of a hesitation or a loss of power while driving. And he had said to me, well, there's no codes, and the computer would totally catch that. And I kind of laughed, being like, you guys act like computers are infallible. You act like there's never going to be a problem. It's always going to catch it, when I can't tell you how many cases we have where we have one of 2 things, right? Either no codes are thrown, but the issue is happening, or 2, the codes are thrown, but they're nonsensical, or they say in there that it doesn't make sense what codes came out. So we cleared them and we test drove it and tried to make them happen again, and they didn't. So then we just give it back. But codes, do serve a purpose and they can be helpful in a way. So Stephen, I'll let you just talk a little bit about, they're kind of like a half step, right, to a verified complaint, and how they can kind of be both a positive and a negative for these cases.
Sure. So there are times where we've had a case where they were able to identify the issue, and for the longest time, though, they did not get any codes. And All of a sudden, we were talking with Volkswagen on one case, and there was one repair invoice where there was a code. Now, all of a sudden, that changed from them saying, no, there's nothing wrong with the vehicle to, oh my gosh, yes, there is something wrong with the vehicle. And they were able to resolve that case with us suddenly because that code came up. But that doesn't always mean that that one code could be the game changer. Sometimes it means that they need to look into it more. So sometimes a code may indicate, well, this got triggered, but we're not sure why it got triggered. And sometimes they'll be like, well, it's just a software issue, and they will kind of go with that. Other times, though, they need to look into it to figure out, well, this actually might be something more. Maybe it's a misfiring cylinder. That code doesn't always indicate clearly that it is a guaranteed problem, but it does start the track for them looking into the issues. So that's why those codes are helpful to have, but it doesn't always guarantee that that right there means there is an issue. There is more to it sometimes based on the type of issue you're having.
Yeah, I've definitely had cases before where they've also tried to divide up a hesitation or stalling and then a complaint of a misfiring. But because they had that same like P103 code every time, we were able to like pull them back together and say, okay, so they may have described it a little bit differently on their visit, but that same code was used throughout. So clearly, it has to be the same issue. But like you said, it's not perfect, right? Codes aren't always perfect, but they definitely help push it in the right direction. And Courtney, I'll let you talk about, because there are some cases that we get where, and specifically one that I think of is the Jeep Compass. I've seen so many cases with the Jeep Compass for its stalling and them not being able to get it to go into gear, and they have to shut it off and restart it in order to get the vehicle going. But there's no codes thrown. The dealership has like never verified a defect. So what we usually recommend is a video, right? Like that's I guess the third and final way of being able to try to push it through. Although again, not as perfect as a verification.
Yeah, definitely not as perfect, but certainly helpful. Photos, videos are definitely helpful, especially if you show them to the dealership and have the dealership mention them on the repair invoice. So if the repair invoice just says cannot duplicate and you're sending us a video for us to send to the manufacturer, it can be helpful, but a lot of times the manufacturers really won't even look at the videos. But if the video was shown to the dealership and the dealership writes on the repair invoice, drove the vehicle 20 miles, were not able to reproduce the issue, but saw customer's video, certainly looks like it's happening or can ascertain what is going on based upon the video, it just makes it that much more credible because the manufacturer's reps can then look at it and say, oh, all right, these dealership techs saw the video and they even think something is wrong here. Because don't forget, the manufacturer's reps that we're dealing with, they're not technicians. They're, just looking at these repair invoices, trying to determine if the techs thought there was an issue. And if all the techs are saying is cannot verify, it's really hard for these reps of the manufacturer to put money on a case or to buy the vehicle back. But if they can look at a repair invoice and say, all right, well, the dealership wasn't able to reproduce it, but these techs saw the video and they certainly think that there's a problem based upon this video. And they wrote that here in the repair invoice, that makes it a whole lot easier and makes your case that much stronger.
And another thing I would say about videos and pictures, while they're not perfect, they are helpful, but one thing you should try to do if you are taking a video or a picture, try to timestamp it, the date, the time, when did this take place? Because sometimes if you just send a general picture and it has no timestamp or anything that shows when this took place, they will argue, oh, that could have been 2 years ago. That could have been 6 months ago. They're not sure when it takes place. So it does help us if you're trying to send us those type of pictures and videos to try to timestamp it too, so we can kind of lock down when did this actually take place.
Similarly, I had a case recently against Nissan where the client was repeatedly complaining of a no start condition. Every time he brought it into the dealership, they couldn't duplicate it. So I decided, because we have cases like this, right, where it hasn't been duplicated, but our client has videos and photos of it happening. Depending on how severe the issue is, we may decide this is worth going to court, this is worth litigating. To kind of show the dividing line, I had a case with, I believe it was Mercedes-Benz, where the client had complained of a lane departure system not working, that safety accessory that tells you if you're drifting out of your lane or if there's a car next to you. They've never really been able to duplicate it, but they have videos of it happening. And it kind of came down to, okay, this is more of a safety accessory. Maybe we can get you a couple, $1,000 off of it, maybe, but we're definitely not going to be able to get a buyback off of this. So that one we kind of declined to take to court. But this Nissan case that I had, his vehicle wouldn't start. That to me is a lemon law type claim, right? It's a safety defect. So I had told him, I was like, listen, I know you have videos, but I've, gone through this before and I know what they're going to do in court. They're going to pick apart every video that you send. So you need to take it really slow. You need to show your foot on the brake. You need to show that your keys are in the car, and you need to show that you're depressing, the ignition button as well. And you have to be able to hold it for, a 1, 2, 3 count, I said, because we've definitely had videos. And Courtney, I think you remember, we had that Jaguar case where the client was complaining his backup camera wasn't working when he immediately turned the car on, and he would tap the button really fast to turn the car on, and it would take a second to boot up. And because it wasn't coming on immediately, he was saying that was a problem. We obviously ultimately didn't litigate that case, but we knew that video would just be torn apart. Like there was just nothing that we could do on that one. But our client listened. He went through and did all the steps. And so we proceeded to litigation with it. Fortunately, the dealer did end up verifying his concern, and we were able to resolve it for a repurchase without having to go through all of those steps. But that can be so important because I've seen them, like you said, just rip apart these videos if they're not thorough enough or they don't have enough detail in them to show what's really going on. Because Courtney, you talk about the photos and videos that we get that even we look at and we're like, I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know what I'm seeing here. What are you doing?
There are so many times where we'll pass videos back and forth and we're like, did you hear anything or did you see anything? The other thing, and it might sound trivial, but try to be calm in the videos. A lot of times, if these videos are going to be presented in court, you don't want to be using foul language. A lot of times our customers are really frustrated and they have certain colorful words to describe the vehicle and what's going on. You don't want to have that. You want to be presenting yourself as a calm, rational individual. Maybe make the car look presentable. There have been times, and it sounds trivial, but I was actually at an arbitration and a client's car was sort of a disaster. There were food wrappers and takeout wrappers all over. And it was something that opposing counsel pointed out to show, hey, I think this guy really isn't even taking care of this car. I think he's just kind of trashing it. And it really wasn't even relevant to what was going on, but it just didn't paint my client in a good light and was something that I wished was different. So just kind of take notice of things like that and don't have something in the background, whether it's visual or whether it's audio, that you wouldn't feel proud of being presented in a courtroom in front of a judge and a jury.
I've gotten many videos with loud music in the background, and I'm like, how are we supposed to figure out what's happening? Just mute your radio for a minute, relax. But I get it. They're trying to do it in time. So I understand it, and it's usually not something you're thinking of at the time, but it is something you should have the forefront of your mind is who's going to be watching these videos? What am I trying to show here? And what do I need to make sure they can see so that they know that I'm not just, sort of picking and choosing what parts of the car I want to show so that I can show a complete video really showing the issues in my car. 2 other items that also I think are really important to hold on to, but can kind of be easily thrown out or gotten rid of as well by consumers is your rental receipts, especially when you're not paying for it, right? But you still have that documentation from the dealer showing that when the vehicle was in and out. Additionally, on top of the rentals receipts are drop-off slips. Steven, I'll let you talk about drop-off slips and how important they can be, especially in cases where a vehicle's been sitting at the dealership and either hasn't been diagnosed yet or they haven't submitted for warranty repairs. So on the manufacturer end, they can't even see that the vehicle's out of service or that anything's happening while we're telling them it is there. It kind of helps with completing that and being able to show when the vehicle was delivered.
Sure, absolutely. So sometimes the client will have to have their vehicle towed into the dealership because it's not running. It just won't start. You can't drive it. Or there is such a serious concern about the safety because of the brakes given out or something of that nature. So there are times, just recently I had a case where the client towed the vehicle in, but the dealership said, well, we'll get to it in a couple days. But the vehicle had to be brought in that day so they could get it lined up. The client got the drop-off slip, so at least now we have documentation showing, well, the vehicle was towed in, It wasn't able to run at the time. It was dropped off on this date. And even though the manufacturer didn't get to it for about 3 days later on, we still show that we took it in at this time. It was not working at this time. And now the manufacturer can't say, well, we don't have any documentation of that, because now we have that drop-off slip to just confirm when it actually came in. And sometimes it will say that it was towed in. If you do have your vehicle towed in, make sure that the drop-off slip reflects that it was towed in and not simply the customer brought it in, because that looks like you drove it in and then you left it there for a couple of days. When you have the vehicle towed in, that's a huge fact that will be weighed towards your case.
Yeah, I guess that's the third one that I didn't even think of, tow receipts. Tow receipts are really important to keep too, and any sort of roadside assistance that you get as well. Courtney, I'll let you kind of talk about in terms of a lot of clients saying, well, my vehicle stalled on me, right? And so AAA came and jumped it for me. And that can be really hard in terms of, that's not technically a notification to the manufacturer because you didn't bring it to the dealership, but it can kind of show the issues that you've been having throughout to show how many times it actually has failed instead of just, going off your word.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ever claim that the vehicle was towed, it's going to be their first question. The manufacturer's first question is going to be, well, do you have the tow receipt? And when we say no, it always just kind of raises a little red flag. It's always better if we can supply them, especially if we talked about earlier how important it is to make sure that the open and close dates on a repair invoice are correct, but a lot of times they're not. And if that open date isn't accurate, a lot of times a client will say, oh, but I'm positive of what that date should have been because it was towed on such and such a date. And the tow receipt would be a perfect way to prove when the vehicle was actually taken to the dealership. So it's just another reason why you want to hang on to that.
Yeah, tow receipts and rental receipts too. So if you're not paying for the rental, usually clients will just throw that page out, right? But if the repair order itself doesn't show the accurate days in and days out. So let's say, for example, you drop the vehicle off, but like Steven said, they don't look at it for a couple of days. I mean, heck, I've had it where a vehicle has sat at a dealership for months. I have a specific case I'm thinking of right now where the client had to go dig up the drop-off slip from the dealer because it had literally been there for months and they had barely even done diagnostics on it. So General Motors couldn't find anything in their system about it. They denied it, and we had to be able to prove that it actually was there because the dealership also wasn't responding to them. So all of that information is so important, especially when you're in a rental provided by the dealer. If they give you that receipt showing when you picked up the rental and when you dropped it off, that can help support any claim that we're trying to say, no, the vehicle was there for much longer than the repair order shows. We have this rental slip showing the true, pick up and drop off dates. Those are all super important when assessing a claim. And worst case scenario, so I've had it before too, where it's a specific Kia case that I had that we actually went to arbitration over, where the client was doing his own maintenance. He was changing his own oil, and eventually the vehicle failed at like 60,000 miles. And so Kia was blaming him. He didn't have any receipts from buying the oil. He didn't have any sort of receipts at all or credit card statements or anything like that to back up what he was doing. But what he did have was an Excel spreadsheet. So he had a spreadsheet with the days in which he changed his oil, the mileage on the car, the type of oil he used, and what sort of maintenance he did. Because he did other stuff too, right? He changed his own brakes. He swapped out his tires. And we did end up being successful on that claim because he also had a background in mechanics. So the arbitration panel, relied on his expertise. But it's so important to even just have your own summary. And Courtney, I'll let you talk about how important that is too for even phone calls that you have with the dealer or the manufacturer to be able to just keep your own log. Because worst case, it is really helpful. Is it the best evidence like a repair order? No, but can be so helpful in developing a timeline and even refreshing your own recollection, moving forward.
Yeah, it's definitely super helpful, especially if you end up in litigation and you're at a deposition and you're being asked, well, how many times did this problem happen and how many times did you complain about it? Because like we said, the documents are not always accurate, especially in those situations. I think we talked about last time where maybe a dealership has closed and so we can no longer get those repair invoices. So if you have your own timeline, your own kind of diary or journal, it's really great because we can show when did the issue happen? When did you complain about it? Even just conversations with the dealership. I've had a lot of situations recently where a dealership said, oh, the vehicle's been sitting here fixed for 3 months, but your client never called us or never followed up or whatever it might be. We even had one dealership who said our client called them and said, don't call me again. So it's super helpful if you have a diary there that can, then you are able to show, hey, I called you this week and I called you that week and I called to follow up and I was continuously told you're still waiting on a part or the vehicle's not ready yet. So especially if someone is saying something opposite to what you're asserting, it's super great to have that written recollection, because a lot more credence is going to be put in a written recollection than you just saying, oh no, that's not true.
And another thing I would say, even with conversations with the dealership, they will text you and email you sometimes, and there's a whole conversation going back and forth via text or email with the dealership. Those conversations, too, are written and are very helpful to us, because it'll kind of show, well, what are they actually telling you? They might be telling you something different other than what they are telling the manufacturer when they're talking to them about your issue. So having those text messages and emails that you've had from the dealership, that's also very helpful to keep as well.
Yeah, I would sort of make a file on your computer or something of the like where you can log all of this and keep track of it all, because people get new cell phones, right? And then all of those messages are gone. Or sometimes, the search tab in your email doesn't work very well, or things get missed. So it's best to just stay organized, to scan in all your repair orders, your rental receipts, things like that, so that you just have them on your hard drive, so that moving forward, you have everything ready to go should you have to bring a claim. And there's nothing wrong with doing this preemptively, right? If you never have to use it, great, but it's better to have it and not need it than the other way around. And when making those Excel spreadsheets or taking those notes, you want to put, date and time, and especially the name of who you talk to. There's so many times where, like Courtney said, we're in a deposition and they're like, well, who did you speak with at the dealer? And they can't come up with a name. And that's fine. I mean, it doesn't completely, kill everything, but it's way more helpful if you can say, I talked to, so-and-so at the dealership and this is what they told me. Because one, they can verify that that's an employee there. And two, it just helps give more credence to what you're saying in terms of, did you actually talk to that person? And it all kind of also helps you keep track. That example I gave earlier of the deposition of the service manager we're taking, I had to ask the client, who at the dealership is the most familiar with your car? Who's going to know all of this? And she had to double check with her husband, even after I went through all the names that were listed as the service manager on the repair orders, and they came up with someone totally different. So it's just so important to keep all of that documented and written down as best you can, because it's really going to help be able to push things forward when it comes to pursuing these lemon law claims. I think that's basically the long and the short of it. I mean, repair orders are the most important, right? Read them, make sure they're correct, make sure they have all the necessary information. If they don't, as we've told you before, once they're closed, they usually can't reopen them, but they can make an addendum where they can write additional notes and print that out for you. As long as it's on dealership letterhead or something directly from them in writing, super, super helpful. Be sure to keep those rental receipts, keep all of your tow bills, keep all of your drop-off slips, along with, like we said, that handy Excel spreadsheet where you can keep track of who you talked to and when, so that you have an accurate log and recording of what you experienced and what you went through, so that should we have to end up in court, we have all that information, readily available. Because you'll be much more thankful that you spent the, 2 or 3 minutes that it's going to take out of your day to update that than when you're sitting in litigation, kind of kicking yourself, wishing you had it. And with that, we want to thank you for listening to us today, and we hope to see you again next time.
Lemon Law Unpeeled is for informative purposes only. It is not to take the place of legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship between the viewers and Robison Lemon Law Group. Individual results also may vary, as outcomes are determined on a case-by-case basis.